Welcome to this Related DAX for Power BI tutorial. In this part of the series, we're going to talk about relationships and the related function. We'll start by looking at how to import multiple tables into a single data model in Power BI Desktop. We'll explain how you can get Power BI to automatically detect relationships between those tables, and if that doesn't work, how you can create and edit relationships manually. We'll spend a bit of time talking about some basic data modeling jargon that you're likely to encounter when discussing data models, and we'll look at how relationships can affect filters in the visualizations in your reports. In the final part of the video, we'll get into the DAX side of things and talk about using the related functions to reference columns in related tables. So let's get started. To get started, I've created a new report, and as usual, the first thing I'll do is import some data from an Excel workbook. Just before I do that, I want to talk about the structure of the data we're going to import, because it's a little more complicated than in previous videos in this series. In previous videos, we've imported all the data for a single report from a single worksheet. In this video, we're going to import multiple different worksheets spread across a range of different Excel files. I'll drop a link in the video description so you can download these files and follow along with the video if you'd like to. And I'm just going to have a quick look in the Movies workbook, which I've already got open here in Excel down on the taskbar. So this represents the main table of data we're going to import, and it should look fairly familiar if you've followed along with previous parts of this series so far. There are 1200 rows of data, each row containing the details for one single film. In previous videos, we've stored things like the name of the director and the name of the studio next to the film's details. Whereas in this video, we've replaced the descriptive names with a simple ID number. So if we want to identify who the director of Jurassic Park is, we'd have to look up the ID number 4 in some kind of lookup table. All the lookup tables for the ID columns we've got in this film table are held in the Other Tables workbook. So if I switch into the Other Tables workbook and find the Director table, we can look in the Director ID column for the Director ID number 4, and then on that row we can look up any relevant details for that item. The same is true for any of these other dimension tables. If I have a look back at the Movies workbook and find the Genre column or Genre ID, I can find that Jurassic Park has an ID of number 8. And if I switch back to the Other Tables workbook, find the genre table, look up the number 8 in that table, and then I can find that Jurassic Park is described as an adventure film. Now, this arrangement of data is a little unusual to find in an Excel workbook, but it is incredibly common to find this arrangement in a relational database or a data warehouse. So we're going to work with this set of tables in our report and look at how we can relate these tables together. So let's head back to the Power BI report, and I'll choose to import data from the Movies workbook to begin with. And there's just a single worksheet in that workbook, as we've seen, so I can check the box next to the film table, choose to load that data into the data model, and then when that has happened, we can have a quick check in the data view that we've got the ID numbers rather than the descriptive names. And then let's have a look in the model view just before we start to import our other tables. Next, I'd like to import all of the other tables which contain the descriptive words related to these ID numbers. When I do that, I'd like Power BI to give me as much help as possible in automatically detecting the relationships between the tables we import. And to try to force it to do that, we can head up to the File menu, choose Options and Settings, and then in the Options dialog box, when it finally loads, we can find the Current File section and the Data Load page. The checkbox labelled Auto Detect New Relationships After Data is Loaded is the one we want to have checked, and we can click OK, and that will try to force Power BI to detect relationships between the tables. There are a couple of things that are important for the relationships to be detected correctly. First of all, the names of the columns are quite important. You can see in the film table I've got a genre ID column, and then if I look back at the genre table that we're about to import, there's also a genre ID column listed there. So Power BI will look for columns with the same name. It's not entirely strict. You can have different cases, so it's not case sensitive, and you can even have spaces in the words actually. So if I separated out the genre and the ID and maybe change the ID capital letters to ID lowercase letters, that will still detect the relationship correctly. I'll just save the workbook there just to update that change. One other thing that's very important is to make sure that at least one of the tables has unique values in the columns that you're going to create the relationships on. So you can see here that in the genre table, each genre ID appears once and once only in this column. Whereas of course in the film table, there are going to be many Western films and many drama films, etc. So these numbers are going to appear many times. So back in the movies workbook, we can see the genre ID number 8, adventure films, appears lots of times for each adventure film. Having made those changes, let's head back to Power BI, and then we can choose to import some more data from an Excel workbook. I'll go with the other tables workbook this time. And then a quick little tip for you, if you want to select multiple workbooks or multiple sheets from the same file, while it's tempting to try to check the top box and then hold down the Shift key and check the last box, that always, annoyingly, auto-unselects the last box. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and uncheck the top box. And a quicker way to do this, if you click on the word certificate, the name of the top table, and then hold down the Shift key and click on the name of the last table, that'll select all the tables without unchecking that last box. I can then click the Load button to import all these new tables, and Power BI will try to detect relationships between the tables we're importing. It makes a bit of a mess of the diagram initially, but that's fairly quick and easy to sort out by clicking on this Reset Layout button in the bottom right hand corner. If I do that, it will lay out all the tables we've imported correctly, and it will show us that even though the names of the columns are slightly different between the genre table and the film table, there is still a relationship between those two columns. When it comes to describing a data model, there are several bits of jargon and terminology that you'll hear used frequently that are well worth understanding. To begin with, we talked about the idea that in the genre table, the genre ID column contains unique values, so each genre ID appears once and once only in the genre table. Whereas in the film table, each genre ID can appear multiple times. This creates a relationship referred to as either a one-to-many or a many-to-one relationship, depending on which perspective or direction you're talking about. You can see the diagram indicates which table sits at the one end of a relationship by showing a little one symbol at that end, whereas the asterisk symbol on the other side indicates the many end of the relationship. When you have an arrangement of tables like this, when you have a single central table sitting in the middle of lots of many-to-one relationships, so you can see film here has lots of many-to-one relationships to all of our other tables, this is referred to as a star schema. So the tables sitting around the outside of the central table represent the points of the star. The table which sits in the middle is referred to as the fact table, whereas the tables which sit at the one end of the relationships around the outside are referred to as dimensions. You'd use the dimension tables to group and filter and slice and pivot your data, whereas information in the fact table is used to aggregate it, so we'd see, for example, the average budget dollars grouped by the genre of each film, as a simple example. Your data models won't always be quite so clear-cut and simple as this one, and in fact in this example we've got an option to include an extra table related to the country table. So the country table contains a column called World Region ID. If I have a look back at that table in the Other Tables workbook, you can see that each country belongs to a world region, and the details for the World Region IDs are stored in the World Regions workbook in a table called Region. Now you'll notice here that I've got a different column name for the Region ID in the Region table and the World Region ID in the Country table. So if I choose to import that World Regions workbook in my data model, let's have a quick look at doing that. If we choose to import from an Excel workbook, we can choose the World Regions workbook and then select the single worksheet that exists in there, called Region. We can then click the Load button to import that new table into the data model. Now because there's no reliable match for column names in this particular arrangement of tables, Power BI doesn't automatically detect the relationship. But that's okay, even if the relationships aren't detected automatically, you can create relationships manually. I'm just going to drag my region table a little closer to the country table, and then I'm going to click and drag the region ID column from region onto the world region ID column in the country table. So I can click and drag to create my own relationship automatically, and the one-to-manyness of that relationship is detected by Power BI. When you have multiple tables in a data model, the relationships are absolutely vital to make sure that your visualizations present the correct results. To demonstrate that in a simple way, let's just create a table that shows how many films belong to each genre. So we can head to the report view and we can insert a table from the visualizations panel. I'm just going to collapse my filters panel for the time being to give myself a bit more space. And then from the genre table in the fields list, I'll insert the genre field. And then from the film table, I'll insert the film ID. This has an automatic aggregation of a count, so when we add that in there, it shows us how many films are made in each genre. And the grand total down there at the bottom equals 1200, which, as you'll see if you switch back to the data view, if you're looking at the film table, there are 1200 rows in there. So everything seems to add up and look normal and sensible. And that's all because the relationship exists. If I head back to the data model view and I choose to delete that relationship, so I can right click on the relationship line and choose to delete it, I'll confirm that I want to do that by clicking the delete button. If I now head back to the report view, we'll see that every single genre now contains 1200 films. Without the relationship in place, Power BI has no way to link the genre IDs in the genre table with the genre IDs in the film table. So I'm going to go back to the data model view and I'm going to recreate that relationship by clicking and dragging the genre ID from the genre table onto the genre ID in the film table. And once that's back in place and joins the correct two columns, I can head back to the report view and find that the data has automatically recalculated itself to give us the correct results. Relationships are also important when it comes to filtering. To demonstrate this, let's have a new report page, and then on here I'm going to insert a new table that's going to include some information from the director table. So I'll head to the director table and let's include the director's full name and their date of birth as well. And I want to display the date of birth as a date rather than as the hierarchy of year, quarter, month and day. So from the drop down list there, I'll change that to show the DOB field. And then I'll just resize the table to make it a little easier to see. Then I'm going to click into a blank part of the page away from the original table and then insert a new table. And I'm going to insert some values from the film table. So I'll start with the film ID. I don't want to aggregate the film ID. I don't want to count how many films there are this time. I'm going to click on the drop down arrow next to the film ID in the field well and then choose to not summarize it. So it gives me the unique film IDs. And then I'm going to include the film title in the same table. And then again, I'm going to include the release date for the film, and I'm going to make sure that I can see the actual date rather than the date hierarchy. So I'll choose the release date. Okay, now I've got two visuals on the page, and as you probably already know in Power BI, all visualizations try to interact with each other. And the interactions between these two tables will be based on the relationship that exists in the data model. So you can see if we quickly switch back to that, it's no great surprise that the director ID field in the director table has a relationship to the director ID field in the film table. Now you might be able to notice there as well that there is a little arrow on that relationship line indicating the direction of this relationship. So just to demonstrate how that works at the moment, if I switch back to the report view, if I were to click on the name of any director in the director table, that will automatically filter all of the films in the film table for the director that I've just selected. I can then click on the name of the director again to clear that filter, pick a different director, and that will filter the table again on the right hand side. So I can do that for any individual director or even multiple directors. If I click on Alfred Hitchcock and then hold down the control key and click on Akira Kurosawa, so I can select multiple items there as well. I can then click on any selected name and again to clear that. That doesn't work, however, in the opposite direction. If I try to select a film here, if I select King Kong, for example, on the right hand side, that doesn't do anything to the table on the left. And the reason for that, if I just clear that filter again to get rid of King Kong, is the direction of the filters or of this relationship back in the data model view is set to a single direction only. You can see that this arrow is pointing from director to film, so filters applied to director will propagate through the relationship and filter the films. But the direction doesn't go in the opposite way, so I can't click a film and filter by director. Now if I wanted that to happen, I'd need to change a property of the relationship that exists. I can change a relationship property in a couple of different ways. I can go to the Manage Relationships button on the Home tab of the ribbon, and I can select any of the relationships that exist in there, and then click the Edit button. It's probably easier, however, if you've identified the relationship you're interested in, just to right-click on that relationship and then choose to view its properties immediately. So you can see that the dialog box that appears shows you the two tables involved in the relationship, so film to director, that's described as a many to one relationship. The cross-filter direction is the important property we're interested in here though. So you can see the direction is single only. If we change the single option to both and then click OK, you can now see that the relationship indicates that the filter direction is in both directions with the arrow symbol that's appeared. So that means if I now head back to the report view, if I clicked on the film King Kong again, it filters the directors table to show the single director who directed that film. Filters aren't limited to working over just a single relationship. They'll follow the chain of relationships as long as the direction of the relationship allows it. So just to demonstrate that, if I switch back to the model view, if we added a new table visual to show the world regions, and if we select a region in that table, the filter direction allows us to filter the countries for the world region, which then allows us to filter the films made in that region. I can't then go to the genre or the studio or language or certificate tables, but I can follow the direction of the relationship up to filter the directors who have directed films in that world region. And just to demonstrate that, it's quite a powerful feature. If I switch back to the report view, let's just give ourselves a little bit more space on the right hand side, and then we can insert a new table, find the region table in the fields list and add the region field to it. If I selected, let's go for Asia for example, that will filter the film table to show all the films made in Asia, and that will then automatically filter the director table to show only those directors who directed films released or made in Asia. So it's quite a powerful feature. You can see filtering works across a range of different relationships, providing the direction of the relationship allows the filter to propagate. Now that we have some basic background information about how relationships work in a data model, let's have a look at a simple DAX function we can use to refer to data in related tables. Just to start with, I'd like to demonstrate why that might be useful in the first place. So I'm going to create another new page in my report, and this time I'm going to add a matrix to it. Now in my matrix, I might like to be able to drop fields from multiple tables to create a hierarchy of values. So I'm going to go to the region table first and drop the region field in the rows bucket. And then I'm going to go to the country table and I'm going to drop the country name in there. And then finally, I'm going to go to the film table and drop the title column just below country. So you can hopefully see that at the moment in the matrix, it's not showing all the fields I've selected. It's grouped these items together in a hierarchy. So I could expand the Asia group, and that shows me all the countries in Asia, and then I can expand a country in Asia, let's go for Japan, and that would show me all the films made in Japan in the world region of Asia. And then I could include some extra values in the values bucket of the field or of the matrix. Let's maybe add in, I don't know, the runtime minutes, for example, and show a sum of runtime minutes. And I'll get these aggregations summing up across the different world regions and countries, and then for the individual films. Now that's probably a fairly common group of fields to add together into a matrix or into a column chart or something like that. And adding them all in individually is a bit tedious. So I could create a hierarchy that puts these three columns together, and then I can drop them into my visuals in one go. Unfortunately, in order to create a hierarchy, all the columns must belong to the same table, and as at the moment they're all spread across three different tables. So what I'd like to do is head into the data view of my film table, and I'd like to bring in the country field and the region field in a new calculated column. So I'm going to click the new column button on the toolbar. And then the first thing I'd like to try to do, in fact if I just zoom in a little bit to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to change the column name, so it's called country name, and I'm going to make this equal to, and I want to try to reference the country name or the country field from the country table. You can hopefully see that I don't get much help here from the IntelliSense. So if I type in the word country, it identifies the film table as a country ID. Now I know that there's a country table with a country field in it, but if I attempted to enter that formula, it all goes wrong. I get an error message saying that a single value for that column can't be determined. When I refer to the country field like this, it tries to refer to the entire column, not the value of the country field that is related to the country ID for this single film. So to make sure that I can return the single country name for the country ID that's stored in this film table, I can use a function called Related. So wrapped around the country field, I'm going to use the Related function. It requires a column name from another table. And if I simply close the round brackets at the end, we'll see that this column now does indeed return the name of the country for each film in this list. And there are more than just the United States, I promise. There we go. Again, just like our filters can follow multiple relationships, so can the related function. So let's create a new column in the same table, and then let's call this one region name, and we'll make this one equal to the related function. And then you'll see the IntelliSense works normally now. I can refer to any other table in the data model, which I can follow this relationship to. So I can go to the region table and then the region column, close the round brackets, and then hit enter. So there we go. We've got both columns that we need in the film table. Now I can simply create the hierarchy that I need to group these fields together. I'll do this in the fields list. I'm going to right click on my region name field, and I'm going to then choose to create a hierarchy by selecting that option from the menu. I'll rename the hierarchy in a moment, but you can hopefully see that the hierarchy has been created, and if I expand it, it's got the region name field in there. I can then right click on the country name, and I can add that to the hierarchy by selecting add to hierarchy, region name hierarchy. And then finally, I'll right click on the the title column, and then choose to add that to the hierarchy, the region name hierarchy. So all three columns now in the hierarchy. Let's just rename this hierarchy now. I'll right click on that and choose to rename it, and let's call it geography. Okay, having done that, I can head back to my report view. And then I'm just going to add in a new matrix to the right hand side of this one. And then in this matrix, I can simply drag my geography hierarchy straight into the rows bucket, and that will automatically perform the grouping that I had to do manually last time. You can also nest the related function within other functions to create more sophisticated calculations. So for the next example, I'd like to calculate an approximate age for each director whenever their films were released. And in order to do that, I need to refer to both the film's release date field and I need to refer to the director's date of birth field, which are of course in separate tables. So I'm going to go back to the data view of my film table, and I'm going to choose to create a new column. And I'm going to give this quite a long-winded title. I'm going to call it Director Age in Year of Film's Release. Okay, and I'll make this equal to the result of the dateDiff function. So in the dateDiff function, I need to provide two dates, a start date and an end date, and then specify which interval of time I'm interested in. So I've pressed Shift and Enter there to head down to the next line, and the start date is going to be the director's date of birth. But again, if I try to refer directly to the director table, I can't do that without using the related function. So I'm going to refer to the related function, and then in some round brackets I get access to all of the tables that the film table is related to. So I can choose the director DOB column, and then close the round brackets, followed by a comma, and then Shift and Enter. I can refer to the film's release date field nicely and easily because that's in the same table. So film release date, followed by another comma, and then finally I want to get the difference in years. I'll press Shift and Enter one more time and then close the round brackets and then enter my formula to create this expression. So there we go, a new column that refers to or calculates the age of the director in the year that their films were released, and I can now use that in any other visualizations in any other page of the report. So I could add a new table, for example, and then I can include the title field of the film, and then I could include the director age when the film was released, and then I could also include the director's name or full name from the director table, and then I could perhaps add a slicer or a filter to use the director age. Let's add a slicer actually, and I'll include the director age in year of film's release, and then I can quickly analyze that table to show directors who were really old when their films were released, or directors who were really young when their films were released, and everything just works nicely. So there we go, some basic background information about how relationships work in data models in Power BI. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.